r/AskScienceFiction. Rero says, LOTR, what power exactly does the One Ring give? I have seen plenty of posts about the One Ring corrupting its bearer with power, or at least promise/allure of power, to achieve any ambition they may have. I understand why it's dangerous, but does it give any power to its bearer? And if so, how much? Like, would it be possible for someone with great mental resilience, like a Green Lantern, to get tricked by the One Ring, but make good use of it, on the way to being fully corrupted? Damn Dirt Ape says, the One Ring is a container for Soren's power. Soren is basically a fallen angel. His powers are vaguely defined, but implied to be immense. That said, the average non-magical person would not be capable of truly harnessing it. If you have no innate magical abilities, it will grant you supernaturally long life, an ability to see through illusions, and likely some resistance to certain magical effects. It will also magically enhance your natural abilities. Hobbits turn invisible because it amplifies their natural sneakiness. A human warrior might become supernaturally strong and durable. A dwarf may gain some magical ability to manipulate stone. Now, if you have some magical abilities, it's a game changer. A wizard might become capable of significantly more powerful magic. A magically inclined elf might suddenly find themselves on par with the most powerful wizards. If the ring returns to Soren, then it will restore him to his full power. The ring also has the ability to manipulate people's minds. It can amplify emotions, increase paranoia, cause certain desires to manifest in a person's mind, etc. The ring is designed to return to Soren. So, it's putting all its energy into that goal. If it thinks it can succeed in that goal by helping you, then it might manipulate the minds of nearby people in ways that benefit you. Also, keep in mind that it magically makes people crave it. So, some characters might have an extreme desire for it, even though they aren't able to take complete advantage of. Verialcitatidises says, the power it grants is according to the wielder's stature. Invisibility is the main thing it granted to the hobbits, because they are generally not an ambitious people, so they had no need of its greater powers. A leader would find that their whims are much easier to achieve, because the ring would allow them to compel their followers, and the greatest beings around were terrified of the thing because, while they were great enough to outright take command of the ring entirely, and all of its powers as a result, they would become something worse than Soren himself in the process, because the power it promises, other than to command the other rings, depends on what its bearer wishes. Even people as low ambition and good-natured as hobbits generally are fell to its corruption over time. Sam is notable for being the only being ever to give it up completely voluntarily, which says a lot about how devoted to Frodo he is, and even then it was trying to tempt him with promises of all of Middle-earth being his garden. Wandering Jurist says, aside from the invisibility thing, the entire issue is deliberately left vague, as is typical of magic things of the era. Whereas nowadays, we are all familiar with the well-defined expectations and powers of the modern magic system as seen in tabletop and Vidar games, Tolkien magicality is more traditional, vague, undefined, and mysterious. You never quite know what magic can or cannot do. That's what makes it magic. Often, you're not even quite sure if it's really there. That's why Gandalf never blasts his foes with magic missiles and fireballs. King Shaitan says, domination. The One Ring is the power to override and dominate the will of all other living things. To dominate the fabric of reality itself. Amatim says, what power exactly does the One Ring give? The Great Rings of Power don't give exact powers. Much of their capabilities depend on the personality of the bearer, but in general, the ruling ring as its name implies grants its wearer dominion. Dominion in a broad sense, to rule the wills of living things, even to rule the behavior of inanimate objects and natural forces. There is actually a close analog in the Rego domain of magic in the mythic Europe setting of the RPG Ars Magica, but if you don't know Ars Magica that's not very helpful I guess. And, I understand why it's dangerous, but does it give any power to its bearer? Absolutely. The temptation of the ruling ring is not false, it can really give you the things it promises. That is why even the wise, or perhaps especially the wise, are so susceptible to it. They are well aware that the ruling ring is not deceiving them. Or at least not fully deceiving them. They are tempted by what they know for certain they could do with such dominion, in accordance with their personal wishes. And if so, how much? Like with all rings of power, the power of the ruling ring acts as a sort of multiplicative effect. It enhances the power you already have, where by power we mean the capacity within your psyche to impose itself on the world around you, the basis for rulership, and when expressed differently. r/AskScienceFiction. Villian Rules says. The Thing and Aliens vs Predators. Could the Thing take over as Xenomorph or Predator? Etanorca1n says. With respect to a Xenomorph, unlikely. A Xenomorph is a silicon-based life form, and the Thing can only assimilate organic carbon-based life. It, quite literally, spits out inorganic matter. Even if that weren't an issue, the sulfuric or hydrofluoric acid that comprises its blood would also pose a bit of a quandary for the Thing. In the crossover series, Batman determined the Yorja's composition, the Predator, was carbon-based, so the Thing would most likely have no issue assimilating it. De Gordy says. Xenomorph, unlikely. We see that the Thing isn't really that much more resistant to damage than normal flesh. And it can't replicate metals. Xenos are not only filled with acid, but made of silicon. It would be like it assimilating a robot that was full of absurd superacid. Predator, I don't see why not. Microgiant says. I don't think he could take them over, but he's strong enough to beat either of them in a fight. I think he could stand up to the Xenomorph's acid blood too. The Predator's cannon could pose a problem but misses. Grim didn't raise a more and the Thing is smart enough to get into close combat pretty quick, where his superior strength and durability will matter. r/AskScienceFiction. Okuro Ishimoto says. Rocky Horror Picture Show, was it legal for Janet and Frank-N-Furter to sleep with Rocky? Rocky, despite having the body of a full-grown man, was technically only about a few hours old and definitely didn't have the right amount of sapience to consent. I know Frank-N-Furter is his creator and an alien, and thus has no reason to follow our silly little Earth laws. But Janet has no excuse other than wanting revenge on Brad for sleeping with the same Marwoma sweet transvestita from transsexual Transylvania that she slept with that very same night. I know I'm banging my head against a brick wall trying to make sense of this movie, but my partner is obsessed with it, and I need the support of anonymous redditors more knowledgeable about this than me before I pitch this question to them. Thick Carly says. Wrong question. It's does Rocky even qualify for personhood as recognized by Earth law? We don't know that he has human or alien DNA. Does that make a difference for Earth-based laws? Is Rocky was born on USA soil, maybe? Does his creation count as birth or as manufacturing? We have to determine if he/it has any protection and under what status before we even determine what laws Janet may or may not be legally culpable for committing. Pigasu says. I'll only say that it wasn't against the law. Having sex with a 7-hour-old, fully grown man with half the brain from another man is not the sort of thing our legal system has precedence for. This one would make it all the way to the Supreme Court, for sure. Dewey Maverick says. People keep saying this, and we are talking Rocky Horror, so a lot is on the table, but WTF. Having sex with a sentient humanoid alien isn't bestiality. Bestiality is, by definition, having sex with an animal. Frank is clearly neither an animal bestial in any way. Wadsworth_mixedmp says. Whether it was legal or not, it's likely that neither of them could have been convicted for it. the state would have to prove every element of a crime, and there's no way to prove Rocky's age. Gage Leather says, physically and mentally, for the most part, Rocky would be above the age of consent. He looks like he's in his 30s and the scar on Eddie's head seemed to indicate that his brain was used to make Rocky. Plus, while Rocky does act Frankenstein-like initially with the fear of fire, he does eventually display adult-level intelligence. Rob_3 says, Rocky Horror Picture Show takes place in Ohio in 1974, and a little research shows that, although the sex laws were not as regressive as they could have been, they were still pretty bad. 2 years prior to the movie, 1972, it would have been illegal for Frank-N-Furter to have consensual sex with Brad or Eddie. How illegal? Looks like 6 months for both of them, and they could have been Asherman acted, which means the judge determined that they were psychopathic or mentally disabled, and put them into a mental institution for the safety of society, where they would be locked away, abused, and neglected. The Ohio courts had ruled that, even if mental health professionals all attested the person did not meet the criteria for the Asherman Act, it could still be applied based on the judgment of the judge. The Ohio legal system was very clear that engaging in homosexual acts was a mental illness, and could be a kind of psychopathy, so severe the person needed to be institutionalized for the safety of the community. The laws, at the time, didn't make any distinction if the sex was consensual or the ages involved. Frank-N-Furter would be in just as much trouble for having sex with Brad as he would for having sex with an infant boy. It was all just as bad in the eyes of the law. Of course, a sympathetic judge who may have given a lighter sentence in the first instance might give out a much bigger one in the second. However, some judges would throw the book at them just for being gay. Regardless of his gender identity, Frank-N-Furter would have been legally considered a man in Ohio and subject to their anti-sodomy laws. And let's be frank, with everything going on in that castle, if Frank-N-Furter's sexuality was put on trial in 1970s Ohio, it would not have gone well. In 1972 the sodomy law was repealed, but replaced with a law that made it illegal to solicit for same-sex sexual acts if the person knew it would be offensive to the other person, or they had acted recklessly in that regard. It did not apply to people of the opposite sex, because it's our God-given right as men to sexually harass women as they are minding their own business walking down the street. /s This law was pretty broadly used. Undercover cops would make passes at men, and then arrest them for making passes back. The court would eventually rule that pretty much it should be assumed that the average citizen in this day and age would definitely find any kind of same-sex solicitation injuriously offensive, because as we continue to become more civilized we become less tolerant of homosexuality, pretty much meaning that proposing any homosexual act is illegal. As late as 1990, Ohio had a case where a police officer had arrested 2 gay men for disorderly conduct because they were holding hands in a parked car. That at least got overturned by a judge. So regardless of Rocky's age, nothing going on in the old Frankenstein place is legal. As for age of consent, Rocky has half of Eddie's brain, but he's not half an Eddie. He is a new creation that was birthed that day, and we can agree his mind is pretty underdeveloped, like a child. Age of consent in Ohio at the time was 15 or 16. The court argued over the interpretation of the law because the legislature tried to be all fancy in how they wrote it, so Rocky was definitely under the age of consent. But this was also the 70s, and although not illegal, society was pretty okay with having sex with minors. Disgustingly so. Live performances of Stray Cat Blues by the Rolling Stones had them singing "I don't care that you're only 13 years old, it ain't no capital crime, it ain't no hanging matter." Lucas and Spielberg also thought it would be edgy to have Indiana Jones to have dated and broken Marian's heart when she was just 12 and he was a college grad. So yeah, the fact that Frank and Rocky were both men would have been the main legal issue with the sex at the time. Although age of consent would also make it technically illegal, there'd be less of a chance it would be looked at, and come on, Convincing anyone that Rocky is just 7 hours old and not way over 16 would be a hard sell in a courtroom. But yeah, at the time it was made, most of what was happening in that castle would have been very illegal in most, if not all, of the United States. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.